Thank you, Richard. Of course, I'm a sort of person who comes from New Zealand. I always introduce my speeches in Māori. Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa, which all of you will understand because you are multilinguists and you know these sorts of languages. But those of you who don't, it means I'm very pleased to be here, but welcome to my speech. If you don't like it, you can walk out, but welcome. Thank you for the opportunity to come here. I love coming to universities. I think that universities are the place where we can still rely on free liberal speech and free liberal thinking. And I know for sure that this university has that reputation. It gives me an opportunity to share ideas of where we are at the agency in the fight against doping in sport and where we might be going. But before I do that, just to give you a bit of a snapshot on where we are at present. We were formed in 1999 and we've grown since then into what I would describe as a well-recognised international agency responsible first for harmonising all the many rules and regulations from sport and countries into a global code. Secondly, for uniting sport, private enterprise, with governments, public authorities. That's unique. It's a unique partnership and not engaged in any other body internationally. And thirdly, this hybrid body that we are has a very high collection of annual dues from governments. Last year, 98.8% of the money that we asked governments for was paid. Now, when you compare that with United Nations bodies, you can see that we are significantly superior. And I just add to that. If we don't collect from governments, we don't collect from sport. Sport have said they match the government payments dollar for dollar. So if we only collect 50% of our money from governments, we would only have 50% of our budget. So it's very important for us that governments commit and pay. The World Anti-Doping Code was initially drafted and unanimously accepted in 2003. It's been reviewed and revised in 2007. And it's now going to be subject to a further review process commencing this year and culminating in the 4th World Conference on Anti-Doping to be convened in Johannesburg, South Africa in November 2013. We now have more than 660 signatories to the code. Now, signatories are sport, very wide variety of sport. We are not an Olympic organisation solely. We have sports as varied as sumo wrestling, kickboxing, every sport that you can possibly think of signed up to our code. In addition, all of the national anti-doping agencies in the world sign up to the code. So we've got 660 signatories, which we have the responsibility of monitoring. We just provided the 2nd compliance report on the code to our board. That was approved in November last year. And there are a number of our signatories who are not compliant. So one of the jobs that we have in the coming months, because we want this to be done in 2012, is to ensure that those who were not compliant in November achieve a compliant status before the end of the year. We run a program called Anti-Doping Development in countries which don't have resource, don't have money, don't have human resource, didn't even know the words anti-doping when we commenced. We have 15 regional anti-doping organisations now encompassing 118 countries of the world. No longer can athletes say there is a safe haven for athletes to go and dope without being subject to an anti-doping program. We've invested more than $50 million in scientific research. We've forged partnerships with Interpol, the International Federation of Pharmaceutical Manufacturers Association, and the Biotechnology Industry Organisation. We've written models of best practice and we've appealed many cases to the Court of Arbitration for Sport. Our advances continued in 2011 with signing a memorandum of understanding with the World Customs Organisation. So that's where we are. Let's look at what we're going to do and where the fight is currently at. I think we all know now the fight against doping in sport has reached the stage where science alone will not eradicate cheating, and on occasions not even detect it. Sample collection and analysis is getting more expensive. The rules seem to be getting more complicated. Laboratory directors and scientists in general continue to be what I would describe as conservative. Indeed, it may be suggested that some err in favour of not returning adverse results for fear of the legal process and the time required to give evidence under attack. Indeed, in general, scientists, as with many other members of our society, do not enjoy the adversarial approach of lawyers. Now, that's just life in general, but it is a fact that there are those who will not go to court. We all know them because they do not like the attacks that they are subjected to. On the other hand, the clever athlete, the sophisticated athlete, is becoming better at cheating, more sophisticated and funded more extensively. That athlete, and there are many of them, might now be confidently of the view that he or she will evade detection using the historical approach of analysis. So what has become really obvious is that the mode of collection of evidence need not simply be through the means of testing. We've moved away from that. We're no longer solely reliant on science. And this is to the discomfort and concern of many, but to the developing success of gathering evidence against those who have cheated. One only has to think about Marion Jones. She competed internationally for 7 years. She won world championships, she won gold medals, she was tested more than 160 times, and yet not one of those samples returned a positive result. Although throughout those 7 years of her competition, she cheated every year. Every year. So the system was not good enough to find her a sophisticated cheater then. What about now? What did she say? She said, I'm a clean athlete. Look at how many times I have been tested. I have been tested more than any other athlete and never been found positive. Therefore, I'm not a cheat. Well, that sort of comment's been made by others. It's nonsensical, obviously, because it's not true. She even wrote about it in her book. And she went to lengths of suing those who said otherwise. Now, there are a few other characters out there who are using similar lines and taking similar steps. And I think what we have to do is say, what does that mean? All it means is they've been tested significantly and not tested positive. It doesn't mean they're clean. It doesn't mean that. Now we've reached the stage where we've got to gather information in other ways, through investigations, and those investigations must form a sensible part of any effective and efficient anti-doping program. There are many bodies already funded by government who are in place doing this on a daily basis, getting the information that can therefore be passed on to sport. In 2011, WADA published some protocols as to how this sort of evidence can be properly shared, and in that process we were greatly aided by Interpol, with whom we have a very significant relationship, with the Drug Enforcement Agency of the United States, with whom also we have a strong connection, and interestingly enough, Major League Baseball. Now, in the past few years, Major League Baseball have made significant steps in what they are doing around the clubhouse. And each team has in the clubhouse a full-time investigator. Not just to check in relation to doping issues, to check in relation to how outsiders come into the clubhouse who might be trying to persuade the athletes to do things, to check on things such as gambling and so on. So they've got information about sport in general, which is very helpful not only to us, but to international federations. That document that we have prepared has been circulated to everybody and indicates how they can work not only with police, but with people like customs officials, where information can be shared. Now, this is not new. It was done by the US in the Balco inquiry, and those who have longer memories will know that the information that was obtained during that inquiry was given to the International Athletic Federation, was given to the United States Anti-Doping Agency, and many athletes who had cheated under the guidance of Victor Conte were precluded from going to the Olympic Games in Athens and subsequently sanctioned for longer terms. In Australia, there is a system there where the Australian Sports Anti-Doping Agency can get information from customs and from the police. So when packages come in from overseas and are seized by customs, the Australian agency can see to whom they're going and take steps if they're going to the people that are engaged in sport. What are some of the challenges that I can see we should be encountering? Number one, continuing and increasing engagement of the criminal underworld in providing prohibited substances through trafficking and distribution. The incentive to do this is very high, as in many parts of the world it's legal activity and the returns on the initial investment are vast. For $100 you might get a return of anything between $1,000 and up to $10,000. Now that's incentive in itself to those of us who are getting 0.5% interest at the bank. It might be a better way of getting your way through university, but I'm not going to persuade you to do that. The reason that this is happening is that it is legal to do it. And so the underworld see this is better than taking a risk of pushing heroin or cocaine. This is better. This is easy. Who are the people who are subjected to it? Young people, high school students, even university students who go to gyms because they want to look good. Now, I'm not just talking about six-packs for guys who can take their t-shirts off in nightclubs. I'm talking about young women who want to look good as well. I'm also talking about security forces, which include the guys who stand at the door of the nightclub to make sure you've got your t-shirt on when you go in, but the police and the other enforcement agencies, including armies of the world. Ready-made clients. So it's not a sporting issue alone, it's a societal issue. And unless society takes steps, it's going to continue. And our view is governments must do more in this area. Got to have laws, got to have good penalties. Don't have good penalties, those responsible for enforcing the laws will not enforce them because they can see people getting away with a slap across the wrist rather than a term in prison. The stuff that these guys get, the raw materials, come from plants within Asia. Primarily China. Get it through the internet. Anybody can get the stuff. You put it together in your kitchen or your backyard laboratory, not regulated, not sanitized, and it's sold. Now, if you guys were to take it and you buy this stuff with no guarantee of what's in it, no guarantee that it's going to be good for your health, no guarantee that it's sanitary, why are you doing it? And kids are doing it. The only way we can make an impact, and this is regrettable, and I see my former president said that in this environment in the last 2 days, is somebody dies. It's we in society take no notice of things unless it's dramatic. You don't get on the news unless you've got some extremity. You don't get on the news if it's good. you've got to have something pretty bad to make it. And it's sad that you need death to get people to focus ideas. Bad health's not good enough. Bad health is not good enough. And at the same time, the criminal underworld is making money out of doing this. It's making money doing other things, challenging the integrity of sport. And we know, because of the work we do, that those who engage in the distribution and trafficking of prohibited substances, steroids, EPO, so on, are also involved in bribery, also involved in corruption, money laundering, betting, and fraud. And don't just put them into separate categories. They're all under the same bad guy approach. The IOC is looking at illegal betting. Good on them. At least it's a start. But to just isolate one component of all these evils which are attacking the values of sport, in my view, is just biding time rather than getting on with what the job really requires. In addition, a lot of world sport now is controlled by the criminal underworld, run in one way or another. So we can't be as confident about the way in which sport is being played as we were 15 years ago. From our perspective, all we can say is listen to us. We've got a bit of experience now. We've been in operation now since 1999. We've learned a lot in that short period of time. We're not primary school kids anymore. We're actually moving on into being a little more advanced in our experience. And we're not ourselves corrupt. There are examples I can give you of where people working in anti-doping have been subject to corrupt opportunities. And we're aware of that. And that's another reason why I say this is a challenge that we have to confront. Second challenge, the growing and encroaching black market for pharmaceutical products. We have good and proper arrangement with the pharmaceutical industry. Regulated pharmaceutical products are all done in the right and correct health way and ethically. The black market is not subjected to any of those regulations or checks. The black market produces materials where they have information during the research and development stage of some of those drugs, and they put it out before substances have been ethically approved or regulated. So, for example, a variety of EPO called Sera, made by Roche, was put on the market in 2008. We had been working with Roche, so we knew when it was going to be on the market, and we knew how to detect it in case athletes were tempted to take it. Tour de France in 2008, 3 guys tested positive. The Beijing Olympic Games, 7 athletes tested positive for that substance. And what did we learn? The black market had it in 2006. So it was actually out there a lot earlier than the good guys expected. And we found that out and then went back and asked for some of the sports to retest some of the samples that had been stored. Third issue, very easy to catch the dumb athlete. The athlete whose IQ is probably about room temperature. This is not my quote, this is Richard Pounds. The dopey doper. The dopey doper almost catches him or herself. And you don't have to run a very complicated program to catch that person. That person is an athlete who thinks they're totally invincible, just like all you young guys, you never think you're going to die, nothing is going to get you. That's that dopey doper. But they get caught easily. On the other hand, the guy that I referred to earlier, the sophisticated doper, is getting better and better at cheating. Some people say Maybe this sophistication has expanded since the advent of WADA. Maybe we're responsible for that because we put rules in place that are so tough that you have to be sophisticated to beat them. And be aware, anytime you have a rule, you're going to have people try to beat it. We all know that in society. If you have a rule that says thou shalt not drive in your car more than 30 k's an hour in a certain zone, everybody goes 40, we know that. You're out there to try to defeat it. So any rule you put in place, and I as a trained lawyer know this only too well, one of the things you used to get asked by clients was, how can I beat this law? How can I evade detection under this statute? Same thing for cheating athletes. They go to people and say, how can I avoid the rules? And they get advice from people who are on the dark side. Microdosing, manipulation, very clever scientists, very clever other members of the Athlete Entourage will help those people evade detection through what I've described before as the analytical process. And we continue to be haunted by the way in which many athletes take human growth hormone and how few samples are collected for the purposes of analysis of HGH. Number 4 challenge to us, money. Not alone in that. It's a challenge that everybody confronts in the world. But the costs of running an anti-doping program are increasing. You have to pay somebody to go and get the sample. You have to pay the laboratory to analyse it. The laboratories have to work on a basis where they're not producing losses. So there's an ever-increasing cost component. But let's keep it in perspective. Some would say annually, internationally, it costs about $300 million a year to run anti-doping. That's in an industry, the sport industry, which is now worth many, many billions of dollars a year. So if sport is going to stand up and say, we're happy to collect 100, 200 billions a year, and the biggest threat to sport is doping, and we're only prepared to spend 300 million to try to get rid of that scourge, then maybe the commitment is not as strong as it should be. Well, at least don't complain about spending 300 million. And at least think, if we ask for more, it might be warranted to protect the very image and the values of sport which they are trying to do. But what concerns me is this. To keep the cost down, some of the sports, some of the countries are sending their sample to the laboratory and saying, don't check for everything, just check for a few things, because that'll cost us less. 2010, nearly 260,000 samples internationally were sent to laboratories. 2010, what's one of the biggest substances that you worry about? EPO, a drug of choice. It's now available in about 40 different varieties. How many positive cases in 2010 for EPO out of 260,000? 36. Now, that's very disappointing. If you were running a corporation, if I were CEO of a corporation and not a hybrid body that I am, and I turned up with those sort of results, I'd be fired. That's pathetic. So you've got to say, why is that happening? We spent millions of dollars on research to be able to detect EPO. We've trained many scientists to be able to do the work. We spent a lot of money on education. And 36 positive cases in 1 year? 339 cases of cannabis. Well, let's get these things in perspective. So we have to do something about that, and we're going to. One of the things I think is happening is what I said before, a selective approach that people are taking. Why are they doing that? Why are they doing that? Number 5 challenge. Annually, these statistics that I just mentioned show about 1 or 2% of those who are tested test positive. It's pretty low. But we're doing some prevalence research work. That prevalence research is still in the stage of production. We're still working. We did some work last year at the Athletic World Championships in Daegu. We did work further at the Pan-Arab Games in Doha. And we will do more this year. But the initial results of that study indicates probably doping is double digits. So if we say it's 1 or 2%, we're probably out by 8 or 9%. That means there's a lot more work to be done, and that's a challenge. Second part of that challenge, team sport. You look at team sport, you look at individual sports, most individuals are tested. You look at team sport, you can go through your whole career as being a member of a team and not be tested. It's not your fault, it's just the process, because there's random selection in teams. In competition, there'll probably be 2 players tested per match. Now, if you've got a roster of 40 players, you know, 2 out of 40, the odds of your being selected are pretty low. We need to engage in more research about whether teams have a good impact on values. Whether if you're in a team culture, you're less likely to cheat because your mate next door to you is going to say you're going to mess up the whole integrity of the team. We've got to have research to look at that. Next challenge we've got, the growing player union approach. You're very familiar with player associations in North America. They're not familiar with player associations in Europe. They're not. And what's happening in Europe now is an increase of unionist activity when it comes to sport. Some of that has been encouraged by the Treaty of Lisbon, where sport is now written into European law. What the athletes seek in Europe is for their trade, sport, to be viewed as employment, and therefore employment laws to prevail. Therefore, drug testing at the workplace, no holiday testing, no out of work hours testing, which is almost totally opposite to the regime that we run, which is 24-hour possibility of testing and certainly 365 days a year. So we're looking at how that sort of increase of activity can be factored into the way in which we treat submissions. We only had to just look across the border to see how the NFL Players Association and the NFL have concluded a deal which initially included HGH testing, but then the Players Association took umbrage. And so instead of becoming something that the players could take credit for, it's becoming something that is a political issue. And that's pretty sad. The major leagues in general. I can remember in Copenhagen in March 2003 when our first code was introduced, many members of the Olympic movement said to WADA, so what are you going to do about the major leagues? I mean, they're still the predominant sports if you look worldwide. And the answer first is, we can't do a darn thing. The major leagues are private organisations. The grounds on which they play are privately owned. There's no government money engaged in the major leagues. So we can't, through our government arm, have jurisdiction. We can't, through our sport arm, have jurisdiction except at times when players who are part of major leagues participate in Olympic Games. And that's when they can be subjected to testing under the code. Outside of that, the testing programs run for the major leagues are those agreed to in the collective bargaining approach. Now, what have we done about that? Initially, we complained a lot. Initially, we went out and said, you guys should do better. And I had a very forceful president in Richard Pound, who would very regularly point out the foibles in the programs that they were then conducting. Accurately, correctly, but he didn't win any friends. What we have done in more recent times is said, right, let's see if these guys can sit around the table and talk in a sensible fashion so that they can see that what we are doing is sensible for them. And we've made some progress. We've made some progress. Baseball only did it because they were exposed during the inquiry, the Mitchell inquiry. And I would say until then, they were adopting an a very strong ostrich approach to doping, and they did. Subsequently, they are starting to get better. They are testing for HGH. They have advanced their program. It's still not perfect, but they've advanced. And I think progress has to be congratulated. Football, I'm going to wait until I see what they actually do with HGH, but they are advancing. Golf has. Now golf is part of the Olympic Games. It actually is added incentive. Tennis has. And you know, the tours, which are privately owned, are already part of WADA, ATP and WTA. Basketball, their subject, we haven't seen the details of their collective bargain yet. They are monitored a little bit by the International Basketball Federation, but they need to take major steps in their program. And you all know about hockey. And I'm not going to venture too many views about hockey because it's a topic which is dearer to your heart. But I can tell you this. Hockey at the All-Star game in Ottawa in a few weeks' time will be campaigning pursuant to one of our projects, Say No to Doping. And those who are participating in the All-Star game will be promoting that campaign. Now that's a significant step. They'll be using the green pucks, and they'll be wearing the T-shirts that promote the campaign. One step at a time. What we then want to do is work with them and their Players Association to ensure that in their collective deal, which is being talked on now, includes a better anti-doping program. Now then, if you say those are our challenges, what are we doing, and what will we do about the challenges? Number one, we've advanced this topic which we call our athlete passport, biological passport. This allows an athlete's profile to be looked at carefully. So it's not just one test, it's a series of tests. It gives the result to the athlete. The athlete can show you, this is my profile. See, it's regular. I'm not cheating, I'm clean. It's a good thing for an athlete to be able to do. But if the athlete is cheating, you'll see surges in the profile, either upwards or downwards. I'm trying to talk about this in lay terms, but that's the profile picture. It's been upheld. The project has been upheld. You can show doping from this project, and that's a significant change. But for it, you need to collect blood. Now, again, if I look back at 2010, there were only 13,000 blood samples collected. 8,000 of those samples were collected by cycling for the purpose of their passport project. So if you look at 5,000 blood samples for the rest of the world across every sport, again, disappointing. And so what we've done at WADA is said to all the anti-doping organisations going forward, when you run your program, at least 10% of the samples you collect ought to be blood. And we'll see what happens in 2012. We have a system, a software system, a computer system where we get all the information called ADAMS. Not to be confused with Eve, but ADAMS. And we're not a male organisation. This is an acronym for Anti-Doping Agency Management System. The issue with ADAMS is data protection. Now, we're not Facebook. We're not Twitter. We're not public. Nobody can hack into ADAMS. At least nobody has hacked into ADAMS. It's a very well secured process. Every athlete that provides whereabouts, and there are now 13,000 international athletes who do that on a regular basis, put information into ADAMS. Every lab result goes into ADAMS. So the information there is tight. It's subject to data protection, obviously. And we are having an issue, we like to call it a dialogue with the European authorities in relation to that, because the European authorities are still saying we're not good enough. So one of our projects in 2012 is to convince those authorities that we are good enough. What do we think about incentives? And we thought about this a little bit. How can you incentivize those who are involved in anti-doping to actually catch cheats? Do you have to pay a $10,000 reward to those who eventually find somebody who's cheating? Some have said to us it might be better to suggest that the French National Anti-Doping Agency test in Germany and the Germans test in France, because then they're going to be more incentivised to catch the cheats that are competing against their nationals. Maybe that's the answer. The point of it is to isolate and emphasise the fact that at the moment there's perhaps no incentive for any national program to detect doping, and rather there's incentive to paint a real picture that their particular country is clean. Look, we do testing in our country, our athletes don't cheat. It's those guys across the border who cheat. It's those guys across the sea, not us. So is that effective? And it's the same for sport. Should we go to athletics and say, why don't you test weightlifting? And why doesn't weightlifting test tennis? Maybe that might be a better way of doing things. Now I'm just creating those from a devil's advocate point of view to say there are issues that need to be confronted. Otherwise we're going to have the same sort of scenario where 1%, 2% are detected, but 10% are cheating. And that may be not good enough. Next activity we do, education. Now, this is a cornerstone of any activity, obviously. It's the only way we can develop values in the youth of today. We're running a program at the moment in Innsbruck at the Winter Youth Olympic Games. It's called the Play True Generation. We've created programs that are available to all of our stakeholders right through the world, free. So don't complain about cost. We're doing it for anybody who wants it and giving it to all those who are going to deliver. Question here though. Some people say education only goes to those who wish to be educated, and the bad guys just ignore it. So if you're looking at a situation where perhaps we've got 90% of athletes who are clean, then they're going to listen to the education programs. What about those that are not clean? Are they listening or just ignoring? And it's a challenge for us to pursue, because I think we need to find out the answer. We have legal challenges regularly. We have problems with lawyers. Lawyers, for their own reasons, elongate hearings. They delay hearings. And it means instead of having a situation where you have good, speedy, cost-effective justice, you get boring, delayed justice. And that's not good for sport, and it's not good for the athlete, and it's certainly not good for anti-doping. I think we have a continuing battle in relation to the balance that we need to convey between the rights of the individual, human rights, and the need to eliminate doping, proportionality. We just got to remember from time to time when that argument comes up, the programs that we run are only conducted by a very few athletes, they're only subject to a very few athletes. The international elite athletes primarily are under the sorts of intrusions that we talk about. And on many occasions already it's been challenged in court. And we have been upheld, our rules have been upheld. The French state court upheld the whereabouts rule, saying it was proportionate. And that was subject to a challenge by one of the athlete unions in Europe. We've now got a decision by the Court of Arbitration for Sport which helped us in our compliance. The IOC wanted to ban athletes from the Olympic Games where they had been sanctioned for a 6-month period in the preceding 4 years. And the court said that was an extra penalty or beyond the sanctions set out in the code. And now in the review, I suspect the IOC, and I look forward to hearing their submission, will want it built into the code, because if it's in the code, it's acceptable. And I think the IOC have taken very good and responsible steps to show they accept that decision, and that's what they will do during the review. There are cases that we have had to look at in the last 12 months involving food contamination. And I mentioned particular clenbuterol and the problem that we've had primarily in Mexico, but also in China, where animals are injected with steroids for the purpose of making more money for those who own the cattle. We've had a number of cases involving spiked supplements. Now, this is not a new issue, it's a matter that's been around for many years, but the supplement industry is such that it is still primarily unregulated and can still lead to situations where athletes, maybe innocently, I think not, maybe inadvertently, I think not, take supplements and get caught because the supplement has a banned substance in it. Finally, another word just about athlete groups. I think sport relies on athletes, and I think many occasions we old guys in dark suits think that we're all about sport. Sport is all about athletes, and we as an organisation are all about the clean athlete, and we want to promote the rights of the clean athlete at all times. What we're confronting with the growth, as I said before, of athlete unions is a different approach. But it's going to happen. And we've warned international sport that this is the process and progress that will be made worldwide by athlete unions. Having said that, it's also an opportunity for athlete unions to be responsible. And if they're properly looking after their clean athlete within their bodies, they will promote good anti-doping programs. The MLB Players Association did that when they agreed to have HGH as part of their testing program. That's a good sign. That's a good sign. I need to say a couple of final words. First, the athlete entourage. All our laws, all our rules really are centred around sanctioning athletes who cheat. But we've got to be fair. It's not often the athlete that decides to cheat. He or she will be convinced by one or more members of the entourage that they surround themselves with, whether that be a doctor, whether it be a trainer, a lawyer, a parent, sports administrator. There's a whole group of people. Now, if that athlete is so persuaded by a member of the entourage and gets caught and is banned for 2 years, what about that person that persuaded them to do it? What are we doing about that person? Sport can only do so much. They can say, well, you can't come into the stadium, or you won't get accreditation to go to that event, or you can't be an official doctor on a team. But governments can actually take much bigger steps. They can cross that guy off the list of regulated doctors. They can disbar a lawyer. And we've got to think, we at WADA have got to think of ways and means of ensuring that complaints about these people are properly heard and that they are disciplined as well as the athlete. That's a challenge. Do you think we've learned a lot in the last few years? It's very easy to be complacent. It's very easy when you're running an organisation like ours to say, just let things roll over. We can't do that. We've got to self-challenge on a regular basis. We've got to avoid complacency. We've got to avoid being entrenched in anecdotal historical thinking. We've got to get away from the fact that saying that sport is the only sport that's got a problem, or that country is one of the only countries that's got a problem. Not right. We need to ask, however, we need to ask the public a few questions. Do people still want sport to be value-based? And we need to ask sport. Does sport wish to protect its values? I think the protection of the integrity of sport is one of the chief foundations of what we do. And it's pretty obvious to me that integrity of sport is being challenged now in many other areas. And I mentioned them before: corruption, bribery, betting. How sport and how governments react to those challenges remains to be seen. The IOC has reacted with relation to illegal betting and will convene another meeting on that in early February. It may well be that what we have done as an amalgam, as a hybrid body of sport and government, provides a model. Please don't waste all the time, energy, money that you've spent on creating us and then neglecting it if you're looking at another issue which is on the same path. That would be alongside the dopey doper. That would be stupid. So, what is the future of anti-doping? The rules will continue to be reviewed and revised, and I hope made simpler. We'll continue now to look at how programs are run according to money. We've got to make sure that anti-doping programs are cost effective. We've got to have more blood sampling. We've got to enhance the athlete biological passport, and we have to have more information on the prevalence of doping. Second area is one I've just mentioned. We must confront complacency. With WADA has come an industry. With an industry there comes resistance to change. We must buck that. We must make sure that those who are involved around the world in anti-doping are not sitting on their chuffs and thinking what we do today we can do tomorrow and we can do the next day. Because you can't. We've got to make sure that those who are hurting the clean athlete are actually found. So I think if we have a proper mix of prevention and deterrence and a hopeful growth of the values and the regard that our young people have to sport, we'll create a more level playing field. But we mustn't forget the encroachment of the criminal underworld. I think this year our review will allow everybody in the world, including you, to suggest appropriate changes that will advance the fight and take account of the challenges that I have mentioned today. Thank you very much for listening. In Māori, kia ora.